Hello everyone and welcome back. My name is Douglas Johnson. I am a E-RYT 500 yoga teacher. I'm an ordained minister, certified Kilobi inquiry facilitator. I basically teach and help people with spirituality, with yoga, meditation, and the psychological part that relates with all of those things, which is a lot of the work that I'm doing these days focuses more on this psychological aspect. So if it's your first time, welcome. And if you get something from this video, please do give it a thumbs up, comment, subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content, because that really helps me out. All right, so today I'd like to talk a little bit about a concept that came to me the other day that I think rings true, and I wanted to share it with you in the hopes that you might find it valuable and helpful. Like most of the things I share with you, if it isn't or it's confusing, if it's confusing, you're always welcome to reach out to me, ask me. But if you don't find it helpful, I don't want you to lose any sleep over it. I don't want you to let it trouble you at all, because these ideas, these concepts, they aren't necessarily hard and fast. They aren't necessarily 100% true or true all of the time or true for everybody. So again, I share with the intent of trying to help from what I've learned through my own journey and by studying the traditions and studying with various teachers. So this is true in this case as well. So the concept today is that enlightenment is really about your conscious mind, the transformation of your conscious mind, your conscious thoughts. And embodiment is really going to be more about the unconscious, which is the body. The body responds to unconscious belief and programming and conditioning, irrespective of what we consciously believe. That's the interesting thing about it, is we can consciously know we shouldn't get upset in a certain situation, and yet we still find ourselves getting upset. Why? Because it has nothing to do with conscious thought. It's unconscious programming, unconscious beliefs, deficiency story, shadow. All of these are unconscious processes. All of these are going to make us feel poorly in our body, make our body react, contract, maybe even develop a disease or illness as a result of these unconscious beliefs and thoughts. So enlightenment, many of you, especially those of you who have worked with me for several years, who've been on maybe a retreat or two, done some deep work, especially the energetic work, the Kundalini work, or you've been doing meditation for a while, you may have experienced a legitimate spiritual awakening and what we call enlightenment. You've had a sort of aha moment, or even aha moments, several of them, where there's this, it really is a sense of sort of awakening to reality. All of a sudden you can see things really as they are, see reality as it is, outside of the limited ego perspective of just your own ideas, beliefs, cultural conditioning. You're able to step beyond that, to see beyond that. And this is what we might call enlightenment. Now, in some traditions and some teachers, they would include the embodiment piece in the enlightenment, or they completely ignore embodiment and they just are simply focused on this conscious awareness. So I like the word embodiment for this second half or second stage or second part of the awakening process, if you will, because many people who learn meditation with me, after a few months or maybe a few years, they might come back to me and say, I've been meditating, I'm seeing my own stuff, my own conditioning. I see how I get upset in certain situations, and I know I shouldn't. I know that there's really nothing to be upset about, or that it's not really right for me to be upset in this situation, and yet I still find myself upset, triggered, whatever it might be. And so what they're experiencing is the fact that the body is not in alignment with their seeing. And this is why embodiment is such a good word to point to this second part. Yes, we can wake up, we can become enlightened, we can see the truth, know what we should be feeling or experiencing in a given situation, and yet still find, irrespective of that, that the body will not go along, will not cooperate. It will get upset in certain situations. It will be triggered in certain situations. Now, if you have experienced trauma in your life, and there, you could say, two types of trauma. One is a little t trauma, which I suspect most of us have experienced some of in our life. Maybe that could be something like getting a bad grade at school, or having done something innocently as a child and then being scolded very harshly by a beloved parent. That can be traumatizing, even though maybe you didn't experience physical or sexual harm. It's psychological in nature. Just the fact that this parent who you adore, who is your world, is, maybe for the first time, screaming at you, yelling at you, telling you you did something wrong. That may be very, very difficult for a little child and a young nervous system to process and to handle. So that can create real trauma, maybe not on the level of someone who, again, has experienced sexual abuse or physical abuse, but it can still be traumatic. And then there's the big T, which again comes from, again, it could be physical abuse, sexual abuse. It could be an accident or, again, a physical traumatic event, car accident, something like that. This creates a very strong, powerful programming in our nervous system that we cannot override with our conscious thoughts or conscious awareness. So a very good example might be someone who ships off to a war zone as a soldier, fights in the war, and experiences trauma in the war zone, and then comes home, and intellectually they know that they are safe. They know that they are home and they are no longer in the war zone, and they no longer need to be hypervigilant. And yet the nervous system may not shut off the hypervigilance, and they hear a muffler backfire, they hear a loud bang, they hear a jackhammer, any sound or maybe sight that triggers the memory in the nervous system can set them off into a panic that is uncontrollable. Interestingly, you may not think that that is the case with you. Most people who haven't been through any sort of spiritual awakening, and this doesn't make you bad if you haven't, okay? It doesn't even make you unspiritual. I don't want this to sound hierarchical or, you know, like there's some kind of progression of getting better and better as one goes through enlightenment and embodiment. Really, from the enlightened perspective, it's all equal. Even the most unconsciousness is equal to perfect enlightenment. The difference for us as human beings is an enlightened person and an embodied person is going to suffer a lot less than someone who isn't. Now, when you're really unconscious, a lot of times you're suffering and you don't even realize it. So the old expression, ignorance is bliss, that really can be true when it comes to this kind of thing. So my advice is, if none of this resonates with you, if none of this makes any sense, then just don't listen, ignore it. It's not important for you. It's not relevant for you. But chances are, if you're watching this video, and especially if you're still listening, then you are probably someone who is either had maybe a spontaneous awakening, or you're just aware of your suffering and you are ready for it to stop. You're ready to end that suffering. So with spiritual awakening, enlightenment, there comes a certain kind of clarity. And with practice and proper guidance, one can begin to get very good at spotting the ego and conditioning or programming as it runs in our system. So just as an example, let's say every time I talk to my father or my mother, I find myself yelling and screaming in anger. And let's say that isn't something I do most of the time or with other people, but for some reason, every time I'm on the phone with my mother or father, I just find myself losing my temper, getting very upset very, very quickly. Now, I get off the phone and I think to myself, this isn't very awake behavior. Why do I get so upset? What is going on here? Again, if I were not spiritually awake, if I were not enlightened at all, then I would simply probably identify with the anger, with the thoughts, with whatever it is that's going on. I would hang up the phone, and instead of questioning why I'm getting upset, I would simply blame it on them. So this is one sign, this is one thing you can check for in your own behavior. Do you, when you get upset, look inward or outward? Okay? Generally speaking, the enlightened person is going to look inward. There may be aspects that relate with the outside world, but at a certain point in your development, spiritually, the distinction between outer and inner fall away. And so really, that discussion of, oh, it's them, it's me, in a sense, no longer really is even relevant. So at the very least, the enlightened person, the awakened person, if they find themselves triggered, if they find themselves upset, if they find themselves being sort of taken over by conditioning, they're going to question that. So again, this is what has happened where students will come to me after months or years of meditation. The meditation has cleansed their perception, their lens, and so they're able to see more clearly, and they can see that this conditioning isn't skillful, it's not beneficial for them, and it's causing suffering, perhaps not only for themselves, but perhaps for other parties as well. So enlightenment, you could say, is usually a prerequisite. Some degree of enlightenment, some degree of awakening is a prerequisite to doing the work of embodiment. Now again, I'm not going to say that as a hard and fast rule. So if you are doing embodiment work like inquiry and you don't feel like you are awake spiritually, or you've had an enlightenment experience, don't concern yourself with it. Keep on working, because I can't say that things are linear on this path. I don't think that they really are, but sometimes it is helpful to speak about them in that way, and that's what I'm doing in this video with the intention of being helpful. So when I teach class in person, I sometimes will say that the first thing, the most important thing, is actually awareness. And a good example of this is if you are trying to do a certain yoga posture that has a certain kind of alignment to it, but you are either A, not aware of the alignment, or B, you're not aware that your body is, you're not aware of the position of your body, how can you correct and get into proper alignment? There has to be a certain level of awareness or consciousness there in order to fix anything or improve anything. There also has to be an awareness that there's a problem. So once again, a typical ego, and again, you can check your own behavior for this. This is really, this isn't really to talk about someone else. All of this work is about you, right? Just as it's about me. I'm not sharing this with you in the sense that you should do this and I don't need to. These are the things that I have done that have brought me the peace and joy that I'm trying to share with you. So the process is, need to check, am I pushing it out there, the blame out there, the fault out there, or am I looking inward? Now again, it's not about blaming anyone. So this isn't about blaming the victim either. It's not about blaming yourself or feeling shame or feeling guilt if you get triggered. But it is about empowering yourself. If the power lies out there in how others treat you, then you are powerless to change the situation, right? You can ask people to change. You can threaten people to try and get them to change. You can do whatever it is in your power to try and get people to change, and they still may not change. Isn't this true? Isn't this a fact? I'm sure you've experienced it in your own life, where you so desperately wish someone would do something differently. You feel that that would solve all your problems if so-and-so would just do X. And no matter how much you implore them and ask them and beg them and try to get them to change, they refuse to. Okay, so this is just reality. That isn't unique to you. What we can change is our own perspective. So enlightenment is a change in perspective. Now I no longer am looking to change the outside world as a means for fixing what I feel inside. Rather, I look to change my perspective. Now, perspective can go a very, very long way, maybe even all the way to embodiment. I'm not going to make a statement either way on that. I'll just leave that open for now because I don't really have an opinion on it. But perspective is very, very powerful. So changing your perspective, getting out of the ego perspective, that's the first step. We have to know that there's something wrong with our approach, that it's causing us suffering. And again, when I say wrong, I do not mean you are guilty or you should feel ashamed. It's a pragmatic term. It's wrong in the sense that you want joy, you want peace, you want health, you want to feel good in your body, and you don't. And instead of blaming someone else, you need to take the power back from them. It's not that they have no responsibility for the condition you're in, but true spirituality is always about this moment. So for a lot of us, our suffering comes from things that happened long ago. In our childhood, things that our parents, siblings, or perhaps teachers or children when we were young did to us, bullying us. These things create a lot of this conditioning in our nervous system. So once we're awake and we begin to notice that there are things that our body reacts to that are not in alignment with the truth that we see. Now, I wish I could say that just because you woke up, that this is 100%, but it's not. A lot of times you end up with what's called a Velcro thought. That's a term that I'm taking from my teacher, Scott Killaby, who taught me inquiry. And a Velcro thought very often causes us to re-identify with the ego. So if you have a lot of awareness, you might feel that pull into identification, but still be able to hold some level of detachment from the feelings. So again, you can say, hey, look, maybe to a loved one who's triggered you, you could say, I'm triggered right now. I just need to step away from the situation, calm down, and then we can talk about it or we can resolve it. That indicates quite a high level of awareness. It does not indicate embodiment, because again, embodiment would mean that the body and the mind are unified. So the fact that you are stepping back from the way the body is reacting and saying, hey, I can't believe this feeling, right? Because I feel angry, or I feel upset, or I feel depressed, or I feel unloved. The awareness, the awakeness is the part that's going to say, you know what, I know that's ultimately not true. I know this person loves me, but I'm just hurt by their actions because of conditioning. Again, probably what we call a core deficiency story, right? An unconscious story about ourselves, that we're not good enough as we are, that we are unlovable, that we're not smart, whatever it might be, whatever the conditioning, usually again in our youth, was what people teased us about, what our parents lovingly but unconsciously maybe told us about ourselves. Oh, you're the pretty one, or oh, you're the smart one, or they meant well, usually most of the time. And when they didn't, it just means that they were under the sway of their own conditioning. So what do you do when you notice that this is happening to you? Well, there are a few practices that you can try that I've mentioned in the past. One very powerful one, but somewhat unfocused practice is Yoga Nidra. So with Yoga Nidra, if you identify certain programs running, certain ways that you feel in certain situations, you can try creating a sankalpa, a statement of intent that will override or overwrite these programs gradually over time. So if you think of your unconscious like a hard drive, you have all these little viruses that were put in there throughout your childhood without your knowing it. Now again, if you're unconscious, you're actually identified with those programs. You think, that's me. I get upset when people say this. I get happy when that happens, whatever it is. You think that's your personality. You think that's who you are. After enlightenment, awakening, you step back away from that. You see the programs are there, but you may not know how to erase them. With Yoga Nidra, you essentially take one big program, if you will, or it doesn't have to be big, but you take a program, and through repetition, this is a very important point, doing Yoga Nidra once is not likely to make that much of a change. But turning Yoga Nidra into a regular practice and using the same Sankalpa over and over again, you can overwrite the negative programming, and what should begin to happen is you begin to see gradual change, or maybe sudden change, but you see change in those instances where you would have before, again, felt the body reacting in a situation that maybe you felt it shouldn't be reacting in. Again, feeling contractions in the body, getting very emotional or upset in a situation where that emotion does not actually match with the situation, right? Getting overly emotional about something, that could be an indication of this. Another way that people sometimes tackle this is through meditation. So meditation is often the way that people actually wake up. But meditation can be used for cleaning up as well. But sometimes it doesn't work. So this is really going to be a case-by-case basis. And I suspect it depends a lot on factors like how often are you meditating? What kind of meditation are you doing? Does your meditation practice allow you to systematically identify and to let go of resistance to what is, regardless of what that is, regardless of what is appearing in awareness? Were you instructed in such a way to allow whatever is arising to be there and to embrace and to love that? So I think, just based on my experience and my study, that meditation will be the slowest method of change. So if you learn just one practice, meditation, and you do that consistently, persistently, enough, long enough, often enough, it potentially could take you through both the enlightenment process and the embodiment process. You will likely need the guidance of a good teacher along the way, whatever form that takes. It could be a book. It could be a tradition that you're plugged into, not one teacher, but many. It could be watching videos like this one, but it's not uncommon with a practice like meditation where you may have learned instructions in a book or through a video or on a retreat and then gone away from the teacher who taught you that, and without realizing it, misunderstood, misinterpreted, or just came to a different phase in your practice where you didn't realize you picked up bad habits. So in my experience, most of the time when people say that a spiritual technique doesn't work for them, it's not the problem of the technique, it's actually user error. And this is very, 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 very common. I'm not saying it's the user's fault. Again, as a teacher, it's my job to be able to explain things to you clearly. So if you don't understand them, you could say, in a very real sense, that might be as much my fault as it is anyone else's. Having said that, as a teacher, I know the importance of repetition and staying connected with your teacher and community. So some of you may hear this as a self-serving message, but I say it actually because I just believe it's true. I think for us to go the distance, very often we will need that help along the way. We will need reminders. We will need to be nudged back on the path when we just deviate slightly. And if I deviate slightly over time, I'm going to get further and further off the path without realizing it, until maybe I'm even going in the opposite direction. And this does happen on the spiritual path, unfortunately. So something to be aware of. The final way that I'm aware of dealing with the unconscious thoughts is going to be inquiry. So inquiry is a process of asking very skillful questions about what is happening in your body. And you could say it's asking the unconscious or asking the body the truth of certain statements. So again, something like, I have nothing to be afraid of. I can ask that question in a meditative state called rest, and see if the answer that comes back is a yes or a no from the body. So if it's a yes, there's just clarity. There's no response, essentially. If there's a no, then I will feel a contraction or some kind of unpleasant emotion, and that means there's an unconscious belief. So by learning the right questions to ask at the right time and learning techniques for clearing and managing energy that comes up as a type of this work, you can think of inquiry as an extension of Kundalini work. Some of you have done Kundalini work with me. Well, inquiry accesses many of the same pathways and same methods of bringing up this unconscious energy and clearing it, so that then we are free of our samskaras and our vasanas, and then we are free to act and to experience the joy of a human life. It doesn't mean we're going to do anything special. It doesn't mean we're going to save anyone. It just means now we're free to actually really live, which ironically or interestingly, most of humanity aren't. They aren't really free in their experience of life. So learning which questions to ask, when, how to process the energy, this is something you can learn. And once you've learned it, like meditation, it is something that you can learn to do on your own. Now, unlike meditation, it isn't really something I can teach to you in one sitting. For most people, it'll take at best weeks and most likely months. And it's something that you and I can do together. And then once you have the ropes, you can start doing it on your own. I encourage you to do it on your own as quickly as you can. And then you can check back in from time to time, just to make sure you're still doing the process properly. Or many people will experience something where they feel like they are missing something. They're not seeing something. And that's where another set of eyes can be really helpful, having somebody to facilitate you. So, once again, this concept that enlightenment is about our conscious thoughts. Embodiment is about the unconscious. Enlightenment shows up as conscious thought, as ideas, as perspective, as the way that we view the world, at least maybe some or most of the time after an awakening experience. Then when we have a Velcro thought, when we have something trigger us, when we feel bad in the body or we have chronic pain in the body, this can be an indication that we are not embodied. That the realization that we had, the intellectual, the seeing that we had in our awakening the body is not yet completely on board. So every cell of our body, you could say, needs to also be on board and believe this. So a very simple way of understanding it or thinking of it is, again, the body is the unconscious. That's the storehouse for the unconscious. That's where unconscious thoughts will show up. And that's how unconscious thoughts dominate our life. Science currently estimates that, I think it's something like 94% of your day is dictated by your unconscious. So we as humans have this illusion that we are walking around making conscious decisions, deciding things, and being free, really. And the reality is we're just driven by the unconscious and by the way our bodies feel and by our emotions. So there is a difference between emotion that is free of conditioning and emotion that is under the sway of conditioning. And it's a huge difference, and it's an important difference, because this work is not about learning to be emotionless. A lot of the joy of being a human being is experiencing the full range of what is on offer as a human being. All the different wonderful, beautiful, sweet, and sour emotions that are available to us. So anyway, everyone, I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. And I'd love to hear from you about your experience. What do you think about enlightenment and embodiment? Have you even heard these terms before? Many people in the spiritual community talk about enlightenment only. And there, I find, is less awareness of embodiment. And yet, as a teacher of spirituality, I find this is actually where most people's work is. Many people in spiritual communities have a good deal of awakeness. It's the embodiment part that is perhaps being missed, even by some very, very smart, very awake teachers. There can still be a sort of glossing over trauma, repression, psychology. And perhaps in the past, these were things that were beyond the scope of what a spiritual master or teacher really could tackle or handle. But I think we're in a day and age where we need this conversation to happen, and we need skillful teachers who can guide people through these challenges on their path, because otherwise it can be extremely frustrating and difficult to practice and meditate or do yoga for years, decades, trying to heal, trying to find the joy and peace and compassion that perhaps our teachers speak of, but seem so elusive for us. So again, my intention here in sharing this with you is, if this is useful, this is helpful, please use it. And again, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you to all my patrons on Patreon who make these videos possible. It really is their support that allows me to have time and energy and resources to make these videos. So until next time, everyone, namaste and have a beautiful day.